Well, hello everybody. This is Professor Paul Hicks talking to you again. We're going to continue our conversation regarding the philosopher John Locke, the 17th century British philosopher. We talked last time about Locke's epistemology, that is the nature of us ideas. Are they innate ideas, or do we, as Locke says, are we a tabula rasa? That is, are we a blank slate for ideas? So today what we're going to talk about is his second treatise of government. Now, the second treatise of government is a work of political philosophy. And what the philosophers are attempting to do in political philosophy is to try to justify why it is that we should have one particular type of society over another. Who should rule? Should there be private property? Right? Where is the power? Is the power going to be amongst the people, or should we have a king, or should we have some sort of aristocracy? Right? Who is the group of people that are supposed to rule, and where is the power derived from? And so this is what we're going to talk about today. Now, you're going to be very familiar with a lot of what John Locke has to say, because the political philosophy of John Locke is really the foundation of the Constitution of the United States, as well as other liberal democracies. So you're going to be very familiar with this. But let's go ahead and talk a little bit about this. So John Locke was what we call a natural law theorist. Natural law theory is an attempt to argue that right and wrong can be derived by understanding the nature of what human beings are like. So rather than, appeal to, say, like what Plato did, to some sort of abstract concept of right or abstract concept of wrong, to be a natural law theorist is to simply say that nature has dictated certain laws. Now, why do we think of it this way? Typically, natural law theorists are going to be religious people. That is, they believe in God. I don't want you to go away from this saying that one must believe in God in order to hold natural law theory, but typically it is the case that those who argue for natural law argue from the position of God. Now, why would this be? Because God has created us, and we are His creation. And if you want to know what right and wrong is, and what you need to do is understand, how did God construct the world? How did God create us? So we've talked already about Plato and in the Euthyphro, the divine command theory, that something is right simply because God commands it, and something is wrong if God prohibits it. Well, that has a lot of failings, the Euthyphro dilemma being one of them that we already talked about. So philosophers have tried to find another way to ground what is right and wrong and still have it become the creation of God. And so natural law theory has provided that avenue for them. So natural law theory states that something is right or wrong if it's in accordance to our nature or against our nature. So if you want to understand what is right and what is wrong, all you have to do is observe people and what is the natural tendencies that they have. These natural tendencies are implanted by God, and so we can understand that if there is a natural tendency to do something or to avoid something, then what we can understand is that that is a directive from God, because God created us this way. All right, so that's just a real quick overview of what natural law theory is. So you'll be able to have a good understanding of where John Locke starts from. All right, so let's go ahead and get into his second treatise of government. Now, you're thinking probably, second treatise of government, whatever happened to the first treatise of government, right? Well, the first treatise of government was actually an argument against Sir Robert Filmer's Patriarcha. And what Filmer was arguing was for a theory called the divine right of kings. So in Filmer's text, he presents an argument for a divinely ordained, hereditary, absolute monarchy. According to Filmer, the biblical Adam, in his role as father, possessed unlimited power over his children, and the authority passed down through the generations. And according to Filmer, the king is a direct descendant of Adam. And so you had the first king, of course, being God, Lord and Master of them all. And then Adam is being the first person, and Adam was to have dominion over the earth. And it just gets passed down to Adam's son, and then on and on and on, until we get to the king. And the king is supposed to be a descendant of Adam, and this, because he is the descendant of Adam, this is supposed to justify why he should rule and that nobody else should, because it is in line with what God wants. So, of course, John Locke doesn't like this, and he's going to go ahead and make some arguments against this. He says, first of all, nowhere does it say that Adam actually has some sort of natural right of dominion. Where did you get this from, is what Locke is trying to say. Nor does it say that even if Adam had it, that somehow his children inherit it. Nobody says that even if, okay, Adam had it and the children had it, nobody says, well, how is this supposed to be transferred? And even if there was a means of transferring power, the line has been lost to history, and nobody can legitimately claim it. Nobody knows who is a descendant of Adam. Just think about it. Even at the time in the modern era here, which is the 17th century Europe, you had kings and you had queens, and they were all supposed to be descendants of Adam, and right. But how could that possibly be? So they all made these wild claims that they were religiously or divinely allowed or have the right to actually rule. And Locke thinks that's just a bunch of nonsense, and he wants to go ahead and move past that. So if in fact the divine right of kings is not going to be the justification for political power, what is? There must be another reason that will give rise to government and political power. And so some philosophers, and here he's talking about ancient philosophers, somebody like Plato, for example, in the Republic, they have argued that political power is the same as the power of a father over the children, or a master over servant, or a husband over his wife, a lord over his slave, right? That there's some sort of form of political power, right? A form of power, and political power is just the same type of relationship, but one of the ruled over the ruled, the ruler over the ruled. So Locke wants to start out and say that's not true, right? There's no forms. Let's go ahead and get rid of all that kind of thing. And so he wants to go ahead and try to define what political power is. And he defines it as following. He says, it is a right of making laws and penalties of death, and consequently all less penalties for the regulating and preserving of property, and of employing the force of the community in the execution of such laws, and in the defense of the Commonwealth from foreign injury, and all this only for the public good. This is what political power really should be for John Locke. So remember, we were talking about natural law theory. So we need to do a little thought experiment here. If you were to ask yourself why it is you believe a lot of what you believe, well, a lot of that comes from your society. That is, you were raised, say, to be a Christian, or you were raised to be a Buddhist. You were raised to believe in a certain political system, to have certain values, a certain moral system. You were taught those things. Well, if we want to understand what the true nature of human beings is, then what we need to do is a thought experiment. What are human beings like before any civilization? Right? If we want to get rid of all the social constructions of how human beings think, well, let's think of what a human being would be like if there was no society, and they weren't raised in a society, they were not raised in any civilization, that the human beings are just out there in what philosophers have called the state of nature. What is the natural state of mankind? Now, previous philosophers, and we're going to talk about, that we're not going to talk about, but have talked about the state of nature, is somebody like the philosopher Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes argued that human beings are naturally evil. That is, they really are self-centered, and they're always looking out for themselves. They're always trying to get more stuff and to have more power than the other guy. And what that does is that causes a state of war. And so for Thomas Hobbes, what the state of nature, when man is outside of all civilization and in the state of nature, he is naturally in a state of war. Now, this is Thomas Hobbes. This is not John Locke, and it's important to keep that separate, because while for Hobbes the state of nature and the state of war are the same thing, they're not going to be for Locke. In fact, the state of war and the state of nature are really opposites according to Locke. So In the state of nature, according to Locke, the natural state of man is one of perfect freedom to order their actions and dispose of their possessions and persons as they think fit. So when you are in the state of nature, you are perfectly free. Right? There's no government, there's no society, nobody's telling you have to do this, you have to do that. You are perfectly free. Right? Human beings are created free. We are created free. So notice this again. So remember natural law theory. If you want to understand what human beings are like, or what human beings should do, look at how human beings are created. We are created free. This is important because freedom and keeping man's freedom is going to be really important here. Right? We are born in a perfect state of liberty to where nobody can tell us what to do or what not to do. And so as a result, any society which would be one in accordance to natural law is going to have to be one which recognizes the liberty and the freedom that human beings have, that is given to us by God, according to this type of theory. In this state of nature, it's a state of equality. Right? I'm free, you're free, everybody's free. Nobody has any power over anybody else because there is no power. There's no governments or institutions or anything like that. So, according to Locke, since people are born with the same advantages of nature, then they should be considered equal in every respect. God considers us equal, so as human beings, shouldn't we consider each other equal? Am I to say as a human being that I'm better than God or that I know more than God? That's not a very wise way of thinking for John Locke. He says only God, who he calls, quote, the Lord and Master of them all, could declare and clearly and explicitly who he wished to give the right of dominion and sovereignty to. But since he did not do that, we are all equal, and we need to start from a base of perfect equality. Now, just because this is a state of liberty, this doesn't mean that you could go do whatever you want, right? That there's no constraints on how you behave. Of course there are. Because remember, we are a creation of God, and we are therefore his property. So what does that mean? What follows from that? If we are created by God, and therefore his property, then our life essentially belongs to God. It's not our life. And so we need to live as long as God chooses for us to live. We do not get to end our life just because it's convenient for us or because we're in pain or any reason like that, right? We got to get rid of that kind of thing. There is, in fact, no suicide allowed. Why is suicide wrong? According to Locke, suicide is wrong because it goes against the natural instinct of human beings who want to live, one. But two, because God created us. And you are God's property. And if you were to take your life, you are taking away the property of God. And that's morally speaking wrong. So we don't want to mess with God's property. So we cannot destroy one another as if we were made, say, for our uses. We're not animals, he says, who are naturally inferior and can therefore be used for our uses. Now, it seems that since we can't take our life, because that would be taking property away from God, well, guess what? You can't take anybody else's life either, because their life also belongs to God. So we have discovered that there is a natural instinct for us to want to stay alive. That is, you do want to stay alive, I'm assuming. You don't want to be in pain, right? These are all natural instincts that we have. As a result, then it is the natural law for us to further life. So natural law theorists like this are going to be against any sort of behavior which interferes with the preservation of life. He says we may not take our own life, and we must preserve the life of others. So this is not always the case, of course. He says unless it's to do justice to an offender, take away or impair life. The only time you can do that is when somebody has done something wrong to you, and it therefore becomes necessary to punish them. Well, so let's talk about punishment here for just a bit. So in the state of nature, right, where there's no civilization, you have the right to punish people who harm you. You have the right to punish your transgressors. Well, you can't punish, though, with unconditional power. You can't punish, right? If somebody takes, um, you know, steals your lunch out of your company's lunchroom, that doesn't warrant, say, the death penalty, right? I mean, that would be, something along those lines. A punishment of that sort would be not to punish them to the degree to what the crime was. So you can only punish to a degree as to stop the violation of the law any further, right? This is out of, once again, natural law. This is out of nature. He says we only have the power to punish a criminal so far as calm reason and conscience say is proportionate to his crime, namely as much punishment as may serve for reparation and restraint. This is the only reason we may infringe upon another's natural rights, because to do so, if we were to infringe upon another's natural rights when they didn't do anything to us, is to go against their liberty, to go against their natural right to liberty, and therefore to go against God. And that's not something we're going to do. So notice here that for Locke, the offender is the one responsible for the punishment because they broke the law. They broke the natural law, and there's a punishment that comes along with breaking that law. And so you made the choice to break the law, to become a criminal, and therefore I have to punish you. Right? When you break the law, you declare to live by some other rule other than that of reason and common fairness. Locke actually says you are sinning against all mankind when you violate these types of laws. You might say, oh, stealing against one person is just violating and harming one. No, you're really violating and harming all of society, because what's going to happen if we allow that type of behavior to continue? We're going to become a den of thieves. So, the victim of the crime has an additional right to seek reparation from whoever transgressed against them. So in the state of nature, if somebody did something wrong to you, you have the right of punishment, and you have the right to seek reparation. If somebody steals $10 from me, I need to get that $10 back in order to be considered whole. So we have two distinct rights. One, you have the right that everybody has to punish the criminal so as to restrain him. Second, you have the right that any injured party has, and that is to get reparations. So now we have two rights out of the state of nature. Now, a magistrate in a society may cancel the punishment for a criminal offense if it says to determine that to punish this criminal is not in the public interest, but they cannot cancel the reparation of an injured party. So when we leave the state of nature and go into a society, these rights follow us. Right? These are rights given to us by God. They don't disappear just when we enter into a society. Now, as far as killing somebody, do you have a right to kill somebody? Well, there's always the self-defense argument that in self-defense, and Locke gives something similar to that. He says, since a murderer can be compensated for, right? If I kill somebody, right, I can't just replace the victim. In the case of murder, he says we have a right to kill murderers, right? Because there's no way to get any sort of reparation for murder. But lesser breaches of the law, according to Locke, cannot be punished by death, because the only proper punishment is to the degree that will do one of three things. One, the purpose of punishment is to make an ill bargain to the offender. Right? You want the offender to go, yeah, that wasn't worth it, so that they won't do it again. Two, you want to give them cause to repent. And three, you want to terrify other people from doing it. So this is what we're supposed to think about when we're talking about punishment. So in the state of nature, everyone has the right to judge cases to enforce the law of nature. But of course, it's unreasonable for a man to be a judge in his own case, because out of self-love, we're going to be a little biased, right? We might punish too severely. It's easier to look at somebody else's case and somebody else's life and somebody else's situation and say, well, it's probably best just to have some sort of payment reparation or something like that. But if you're judging in your own case, you're going to be pretty harsh, and so we don't want to do that. So where do we get an independent umpire to judge our case for us? He says the proper remedy for these types of inconveniences in the state of nature is going to be for a civil government. Right? We need a civil government. But in going back, to Divine Right of Kings with Filmer and with Thomas Hobbes' social contract with his monarchy, an absolute monarch is the judge of his own case and the punisher, right? So if we were to have an absolute monarch, we're going to have somebody who judges all their own case and punishes everybody who goes against them. And what do we find when we have a monarchy like that? We find that, number one, the king is just a mere man, and as a result, they punish too severely, they concentrate their power, and it's not for the best interest of everybody. Right? So we want to get away from that. Fact is according to John Locke, he says it's better to just remain in the state of nature than to allow for a mere man to have so much power. This was going against Thomas Hobbes, who argued that we create a civil government so that we get out of the state of nature, which is the state of war. Locke is different. Locke would rather remain in the state of nature than to give somebody so much power, to take away our liberty. Right? We want to get away from something like that. Now, of course, you might ask, really, the state of nature, nobody's ever existed in this state of nature. Well, Locke gives some examples where he thinks the state of nature actually applies, that it's not just a thought experiment. One, think about all monarchs and all rulers. Anybody a heads of state right now, they're all in the state of nature, because there's nobody above the ruler. There's nobody above the king. There's nobody above the president, the prime minister, or whoever. There's nobody above them. And so they are equal amongst other rulers. So they're really in this sort of state of nature because there's no overriding power of them. He also gives an example of men who make promises on a desert island, or he says between a Swiss and American Indian in the woods of America. He says the truth of their promise keeping, what binds them as men, not as members of society, but binds them as men. And it's important to the two of them, right? You don't need to bring society into this. All right, so let's talk about the state of war. So remember, Thomas Hobbes argued that the state of nature is a state of war. Well, Locke wants to go ahead and separate these two things and say the state of nature and the state of war are actually exact opposites. So let's talk about what a state of war is. How do I know when somebody declares war against me? According to Locke, he says somebody's in a state of war when they declare by word or action, not as a sudden outburst of rage, but as a matter of calm, settled design, that he intends to end another man's life. If you, by a matter of calm, settled design, intend to end my life, then you have put yourself into a state of war against me. All right? You put yourself in a state of war against me and against anybody else who will come to my defense. And it is reasonable and just that I would have a right to destroy anything that threatens me with destruction. Because the fundamental law says I must preserve mankind as much as possible. But I may destroy any man who makes war against me. Right? It is in the preservation of mankind that I do that. I know that seems like it might be a contradiction, that killing somebody preserves mankind. But for Locke, what's going to happen if we allow people to just kill people? Right? That's not going to work out very well for us. So here's the thing. Anytime anybody tries to get me into their power without my consent, we are plunged into a state of war. So if you come into my house, you are coming into a state of war. You are declaring war against me when you do come into my house without permission or try to physically harm me or my family. You are entering into a state of war. That is a declaration of war. I don't need to even know that you intend to kill me, because if you're coming at me and you're looking like you're trying to harm me or hurt me, or if I'm sitting at home and you break into my house while I'm at home and do some sort of home invasion, I don't need to know that you're actually going to kill me or if you're just going to steal stuff. Once you've broken into my home and said do a home invasion, that is enough for me to know you just declared war against me, and I therefore have the right to kill you now, even if I don't know for certainty that you're going to try to kill me. Right? I can assume that because once I'm in your power, you'll be able to do whatever you please. You'll be able to do the worst of the worst, which is to kill me. I can assume that you will want me to do something which is against my own freedom, because otherwise you wouldn't be attacking me. So you want me to do something to benefit you, but not to benefit me, not something I want to do or choose to do. So it is lawful for me then therefore to kill a thief, since he is attempting to put me under his power. Now, Locke argues that once the actual force is over, that we need to appeal to law. So you break into my house, they tie me up, but you leave, you steal my stuff. I can't go out there following you and try to get my stuff back. I have to appeal to the actual law. I need to let the magistrates and society deal with this. So if somebody is attempting to steal from me now, I have the right to defend myself. But if somebody already did and has left, I now need to defer to the law. Therefore, notice here, the state of nature and the state of war are two distinct states. And he says, those that treat them as the same are mistaken. He's talking about Thomas Hobbes here. One, he says, is a state of peace, goodwill, mutual assistance, and preservation. That's the state of nature. But the state of war is one of enmity, malice, violence, and mutual destruction. That is, they are in fact very different. The state of nature, according to Locke, is where men live together according to reason. No one on earth stands above them both and has an authority to judge between them. But a state of war is a man uses or declares his intention to use force against another man when no one on earth to who the other can appeal for relief. All right, so let's make sure that we have this straight. The state of war, state of nature, two different things for John Locke, not the same thing. The state of nature is about freedom. The state of war is about malice and enmity. All right, so let's think about other rights and things which cannot be done. So think about 17th century Europe. They were very well aware of the slave trade that was going on. Slavery had been around for obviously a very long time. And you would think that because God created all of us free, that there should not be any sort of slaves. And for the most part, John Locke agrees with you. There are times when you can keep slaves, which we'll get to in just a bit. But for the most part, John Locke thinks slavery is morally wrong because it goes against God's creation of us as free human beings. When you're taking away my freedom, you are going against God. And that's a problem. It's morally speaking wrong. So, it is natural liberty of man to be free from any superior power on earth, and not to be under the will or legislative authority of men, but to be ruled only by the law of nature. Therefore, slavery does not accord with this, right? So Locke quotes, here's a quote here, freedom of men under government is to have a standing rule to live by, common to every one of that society, and made by the legislative power erected in it, a liberty to follow my own will in all things where the rule prescribes not, and not to be the subject to the inconstant, uncertain, unknown, arbitrary will of another man. As freedom of nature is to be under no other restraint but the law of nature. So slavery is immediately understood to be wrong because I cannot put my life and my body and myself under the arbitrary will of any other person. So, according to Locke, a man cannot, by compact or even by consent, enslave himself to anyone, nor put himself under the absolute arbitrary power of another to take away his life when he pleases. Remember, I can't take away my life, right? Because God gave me my life. God is the only one who has the right to take away my life. I'm not allowed to commit suicide. I'm not allowed to sell my body because I'd be giving something that I don't actually own, which is my life, because my life belongs to God. Right? Since man cannot take away his own life, he cannot give this right or power over to another person, that is a master, and because we don't have it to begin with. Some people have argued that, well, maybe, if you look in the Old Testament, how the Jews sold themselves into slavery, but Locke says, even if you look at the Old Testament here in Exodus, it was not that they were sold into slavery, really, but they were sold in what he calls drudgery, right? The master could not end the life or maim him. That, right, the body of the person was not in control, to be controlled by the master. However, there is a possibility of becoming a just slave, right? And how do we do this? This is because if you declared war against me, I have the right to end your life, right? If you declare war against me, I have the right to end your life. You have just transferred your life over to me. But what if I am able to take you under my power and decide, I don't want to destroy you? Locke actually gives the victor of that war another option, and that is to enslave them. See, the state of slavery is just the continuation of a state of war between a lawful conqueror and a captive, in which the conqueror delays to take the life of the captive and instead decides to make use of them. So here we have a very liberal philosopher in John Locke who argues that everybody is free, everybody has liberty, but you get this argument of, but some slavery is okay. Now, here once again, it is that person who committed the crime against me, who declared war on me, that is really giving their life over to me. All right. So make that, if you accept that understanding of slavery, make of that what you will. All right. So I want to get into chapter 5 right now and talk about property, because this is really important, especially for somebody like John Locke. And when we get to Karl Marx in a couple weeks, this is going to be a big deal. All right. So Locke opens up chapter 5. He quotes Psalms. God has given the earth to children of mankind in common. So God gave us all the earth in common. Remember, he's not just giving it to one person, right? The divine right of kings is out. He gave all of the earth to all of us in common. Well, how is it that we're able to make use of common property, right? Because I gotta take some property where only I use it and nobody else can use it. So I have to take property from what's in common, what's left to all of us, and make it private property, such that it's property that only I can use and nobody else has a right to use it. So when can we truly do this? When is it okay? So remember, we need to have some capacity for private property, but how do we do that? So you think about, although the earth and all inferior creatures are common to all men, there is something which man owns and nobody has a right to. Remember, my life. I have my life. You don't own my life. I own my body. This is my body, not yours. You can't control it, only I can. Well, if I own my body, then I also must own my labor. If I go out into the field and pick apples, I did that, not you. I did that. Right? So I own my labor. So when I take my labor and mix it in with common property, it ceases to be common property and now becomes private property. So, an example of this, like I said, maybe there's a wild apple orchard and all the apples are there for common property for anybody to take, but I'm going to go because I'm hungry and my family's hungry. I'm going to go pick up, say, a couple dozen apples to feed my family. When I do that, I mixed my labor in with the common property, and I'm now able to take out those couple dozen apples and give them over to myself and my family to eat. Now, here's the deal. You have to make sure, remember the first law of nature here, where you have to preserve mankind. So you can't be greedy when taking, this property, making it private from common property. You can't be greedy. He says you can only attach your labor so as long as there is left enough and as good and common for others. So I have to leave enough for others to use, and it has to be of just as good quality of what I took. So, once again, if I pick up some apples from the forest and eat them, they're mine and mine alone. Why? Because I put my labor into it. Then, as long as I've left enough for others, nobody can complain that I took what is considered common property. Nobody has to give me consent to do it. It's mine by nature of my mixing my labor into it. So since mixing labor with common property puts what was in common to be now private, we have this question. Can I hoard? Can I hoard as much as I want? What are the natural limits to property that we actually have? Well, according to Locke, the law of nature sets these limits to property. Number one, I can only take what I can use before it spoils. If I'm taking so many apples that I don't even get a chance to eat them all, and they're just spoiling, then I've taken more than what my share is out of the common property, and I've done something wrong. So I can't take any more before it spoils, and I have to leave as much and as good for others. Why? Because the law of nature states I must preserve mankind. But what about the ownership of the earth itself? So now we're not talking about just, say, some random apple trees out in the woods. What about if I want to actually fence off a piece of land and farm it and grow stuff and make it mine? Well, according to Locke, you're allowed to do this. He says when man tills, plants, improves, cultivates, and can use the product of land, that land becomes his. And he may enclose it away from any sort of common use. However, once I fence off the land that I work, nobody has claim to its title because I took something that was held in common and combined it with my labor, and therefore it is now private property. I own that piece of land. Now Locke says, look, if you don't agree with me, he says, just think about how it is we actually value land. Imagine that there is an acre of land, hasn't been cultivated, it's just empty land. Now imagine an acre of land that has been planted, say, with tobacco or sugar, wheat, or barley, and it's fully cultivated. Which acre of land is worth more? The one that is cultivated or the one that's not cultivated? Right? So clearly it seems that the one that is cultivated is actually going to be the more valuable piece of land. Why? Because labor was mixed into it and labor made it valuable. It was the very fact that labor was mixed into it that it made it valuable. Right? That's what's valuable, labor. Well, most things used by man have value only for a short duration. Remember talking about apples and pulling apples from the apple orchard. Right? Those will decay and perish if we don't consume them. And the law of nature says I have to leave as much and as good for others, and that I can't take more than will actually spoil. Right? Well, what about other goods? There's some things that we can have that will never spoil. Now, Locke calls these durable goods. So these are going to be things like gold, silver, diamonds. These have value not by agreement. They have value by agreement, not by, say, some sort of usefulness for survival. We give them value. There's no natural value to gold or silver or diamonds. We give them value. We like them, and we say we value them. But Naturally speaking, they don't have any value. You can live just as well without gold and diamonds as you can live with them. Right? There's no real value to actually preserving mankind. So here's the thing. Can I hoard as much durable goods as I want? Remember, I can have as much as I want as long as I leave as good and enough for others, and I don't take so much that I can never use it before it spoils. Right? If I gather 100 bushels of apples, which will spoil soon, here's what I can do. I can trade it. Right? I can trade it. I can say, you know what? I'm only going to eat 20 apples. That's all I have enough of the ability to eat. And I'm going to pick 100 apples. Right? So that... All right, sorry for the interruption there. Okay, so going back to John Locke here. So we have durable goods, and I want some durable goods. So here's what I'm going to do. You have a large collection of durable goods. Say you have a lot of gold or diamonds that I want. And I have an apple orchard. Now, I can only use 20 apples, but I will pick 100 apples. I'll use the 20, and then the 80 that I have left over, I can't use it, and I'm not allowed to keep it because it will spoil if I can't use it, but I can trade it. I can trade it to you. Maybe you don't want to go pick apples. So here's what I'll do. I will sell you some apples. All you have to do, I will give you these apples, and I'll trade you, say, for some gold, silver, diamonds, shiny pebbles, whatever it is that we like. I am allowed to do that, right? Notice, I'm still preserving mankind because I'm helping you eat, and I'm not spoiling whatever I took. And so it's perfectly acceptable, right? All right. So according to Locke, you can make these types of trades, and you can gain these durable goods, which have value by agreement rather than out of nature. And you can hoard those if you want. So think about that. You have the natural right, according to John Locke, to hoard durable goods or things which have value only by agreement and not by nature. So think of money here for a bit. You have a right to hoard money. In fact, this is how money comes into use. I have apples, you have gold, somebody else has plums, and we make these arrangements to where I give a little apples to get some plums, I give a little apples to get some nuts, I give little apples to get some durable goods, whatever. I'm allowed to hoard those durable goods. I'm allowed to hoard money. This is going to become really important in the next couple of weeks, especially when we get to Karl Marx. Do you really have that right to private property or not? Do you truly have a right to hoard the durable goods when other people say may need them? Now, I say need with quotes because we need to talk about what's really necessary or not. But we're going to talk more about that when we get into Karl Marx. So this is a good opening into John Locke, the second treatise of government. We had an opportunity to talk about how money comes into power, how it is that private property comes into play. So go ahead and read this, answer your questions, and do your discussion. And I hope this helps. All right. So everybody stay safe out there. I hope you're staying home. And I'll talk to you next week.